There always seems to be a large debate on displacement and whether it actually matters. So today we're taking a look at a few different engine combinations, namely a Pontiac 350, 400, 428, and 455, all with essentially the same parts to see if it all actually matters. So let's dive right into this and see what we end up with. But before we get too far, comment down below and let me know what you guys are working on. Alright, so the parts list. We're using 6x4 heads at 92cc. These range from actually 92 to about 94. Using a factory dual plane intake, Summit 2802 cam, 1 3/4 inch headers with 30-inch primaries, 92 octane, 1970s era accessories, things like the water pump, the power steering pump, things like that, and factory style rockers. The first combination is the smallest one, it's a Pontiac 350. This runs with 8.35 compression ratio and maxes out at 359 horsepower at 5,500 RPM. 373 foot-pounds of torque were had at 4,500 RPM, but it averaged 263 horsepower from 2,000 to 6,500 RPM. And the average torque set at 327 average foot-pounds over that same range. Next up, we have the tried and true Pontiac 400. This sits at 9.02 compression ratio, peaked out at 387 horsepower at 5,000 RPM, 500 less than 350, and had a maximum of 434 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. Again, 500 RPM less than 350. Now the big thing here we're going to see is 288 average horsepower across that 2,000 to 6,500 RPM range. Now obviously we're dumping off quite a bit of power at the end here, but we'll get to that a little bit later. We averaged 369 foot-pounds of torque across that same range. Next up we have the classic Pontiac 428. This one sat at 9.72 compression ratio and maxed out at 391 horsepower at 4,500 RPM and 470 torque at 4,000 RPM. Over that 2,000 RPM to 6,500 RPM range, we saw an average of 288 horsepower and 369 foot-pounds of torque. Again, 500 RPM less to make that same horsepower. However, the torque was the same RPM, meaning more displacement, you get a little more torque in that same area. Finally, we get to the engine that most guys are curious about, the Pontiac 455. With this combination, we're sitting at a 10.3 compression ratio, 406 peak horsepower at 4,500 RPM, the same as the 428, and 500 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM, the same as the 428 and the 400 as far as RPM goes. Now, oddly enough, we saw an average horsepower of 290 from that 2,000 to 6,500 RPM range, and 390 foot-pounds of torque in that same range. Now, the thing here is, this thing is running out of airflow at a certain point. Now, obviously, that means that we're going to see more torque over that same range because of the restricted air. However, it's definitely going to hurt your horsepower on the higher end. Let's take a quick look and see how all of these actually compare on our graph, because I know you're curious about that. But it doesn't just stop there. If you're interested to see how compression ratio actually impacts a specific engine, click this video right here, right now to see how that works.